and you that all are seated. Well, we can start. So please, we want to.
So welcome. Good to see that we had a coffee break and some of us at least are back. It is a long day, but hopefully by the end of the day we will be all, revitalized after so many things we have heard and learned. So this fourth symposium relates to the work that comes out from the LD Group Lab, and as George has already said, it relates to the psychology and the service of learning and cognitive functions, research and practice. There is another one following up right on language and cognition. Well, there are several projects and funding that has supported this research over the last 10 to 15 years, and the initial discussion that we had within the board of CAN was just to speak about what we have done over this last decade. So everything started with FP6 grants. Some of you perhaps were not in academia when these grants were available back then. Then moved on to some international collaborations with the University of Alberta, where I have been also got my graduate education. Then with the Ministry of Education and Culture, we got another grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, then from the Research Promotion and Innovation Foundation, actually that time was Promotion Foundation, more recently from IDEC, Cyprus Research and Innovation Foundation, and finally a large grant that relates to Horizon 2020 from the European Research Executive Agency. And perhaps we have all heard about the new one on Onesilos that looks into some other interesting issues, and we have still openings for 2 postdocs. So all these things have led us to study something, and therefore what we study. If we have or if we can think of a research engine, something that will be very central in this concept, that will be specific learning disabilities, in this group at least. So specific learning disabilities in our work relates to test development this year, so we have either development or adaptation and validation, of course, of several assessment instruments for the study of SLD grid. We have also analytic methods that we have developed, how, for instance, systematic, longitudinal, and cross-linguistic or cross-cultural methods improve our understanding, let's say, of reading, spelling development, math development, and so forth. We have even developed theories that are very influential in the literature today about the nature and conceptualization of early correlates, let's say, of particular skills, but we have also looked into dimensions like processing speed or other cognitive aspects of learning. And we look also to the prominent theoretical accounts, how these, if they are compared, can help us to decipher any correlate of the given performance that we want to support. And speaking about support, we move toward interventions, developing nowadays specific designs about treatment, trying to figure out when the treatment works for whom and why, but also applying either remedial formats like aptitude treatment interaction or RCT designs just to maximize the benefits of the treatment, and also more recently mathematical methods and models that relate to microgenetic analysis and computational analysis about how an individual performs through a particular treatment time, given always the type of the remediation that is given. So the emphasis is on learning and therefore on cognition, intelligence, and achievement. And if we could just put those in a very simple terms, we have looked at, and we looked at inhibition, arousal, attention, working memory, information processing, planning, processing speed, as I said, and executive functions in a broader term. Because we are mostly interested about learning competencies and therefore learning problems at primary or secondary level. Please keep this because we will just close with this reference at the end. Several of these issues have been developed in many papers. I refrain myself from just presenting papers today, but if you would like to have just a reference to begin with, this CIA book, as it is now called, that would be a good start for everyone. Now, how do we study what we study? Because eventually this is important in a very fantastic group of colleagues. We have, first of all, look at assessment and then remediation, of course. Speaking about assessment, we have standardized, or as I said, validate several measures like the cognitive assessment system across different age range, and this provides us data on reading difficulties, ADHD, mental retardation, poor comprehenders, giftedness, even, of course, TDC, typical developing children. We have ERSB, that gives also certain dimensions, DSD Junior, which is the dyslexia test, screening test, and we have also the dyslexia early screening test, and you can see the original publications at the very bottom. And of course, based on that, in large samples that we have validated or standardized these measures, we have different type of intervention programs that we have developed. Those that are listed here relate primarily to the treatment of reading deficits, but also attention deficits. 2 or 3 of those are already online and they have been completed, and there are a few others that are under development. Here is an example, for instance, and this relates to a project that has been very recently closed, the Redistance. And here is an online remediation, the 3rd presentation today from the colleagues coming from the SAFE Lab, from the Department of Computer Science here at the University of Cyprus. We'll speak more about that. And we have also the Graph-O-Learn, which is a very long-lasting collaboration. You will just live for several years, we say, when you show up, when we speak about years. So thank you for coming, our colleagues from the SAFE Lab. We have this one, which is a long-lasting collaboration with the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. And here are just screenshots of what the game includes at the very onset of the game online. Further to that, we want to also emphasize that we move forward from learning disorders to learning deficits or dysfunction. So we try, this is what the first 2 presentations will talk about or underline or underscore, that we want to move from what we usually do and speak about disorders to talk about deficits or dysfunctions. This is possible using different type of measurements and methods and analysis nowadays, from eye tracking and the use of ERPs to the fixation-related potentials, which relates to how both data concurrently can be analyzed, those collected from eye tracker and those that are collected through EEGs. Of course, the project that has really boosted all this work the last few years relates to NeoPrism-C. In doing so, we have an amazing group of collaborators from 10 European countries and Canada and the States, and 17 beneficiaries and partners from academic, clinical, and industrial sectors that work together and collaborate across teams. And of course, I'd like to thank them all because they are very you know, perhaps the leaders on all this, let's put this, because it's an excellent group of collaborators. And the purpose of Neoplasticity, just very quickly in 1 or 2 slides, is to train early stage researchers from multiple disciplines, psychology as you see here, neuroscience, even data science, in applying the research domain criteria approach to the study of the mechanisms of neurodevelopmental disorders to inform and begin and test appropriate treatments. And as I said earlier, we have academic, industrial, and clinical partners in this. This is the research domain framework. If you haven't had a chance to look at this before, initially suggested by NIMH. And of course, I'd like to close with how we study all this and why we do that, because either if we speak about attention and arousal, then we might have problems at the level of planning, at the level of working memory or speed of processing, you name it. But at the end, we have deficits that cut across different type of categories as they are known today, like reading, spelling, comprehension, math, anything and everything. Just here are some of the examples listed here. And of course, this can lead to secondary learning problems, and these secondary learning problems can just feed back to the initial reasons why all this have occurred. But if you think that problems at any level cause problems at levels below, and the higher the original source of the problem, the broader the problem, then when it comes to how we study this, if you take, for example, the work by Fuster that looks into bottom-up pathways, back-front pathways, right-left pathways, or back-front pathways, we might be, rather secure about what we know today, but eventually when it comes to the learning problems themselves, they still remain unspecified or generalized. Believe me so, when we have today data already published using machine learning, we get data that have nothing to do with what we knew until yesterday. And therefore, with SLD being very centered in all this, we have evidence for subgroups in our publications, we have evidence for comorbidity, we have evidence coming from eye tracking and EEG, as I said, or a combination of the two. We look into different types of processes. We could add anything and everything here, even cross-cultural studies, reading comprehension emphasis, and all this comes down to the RDoc today, which means that if we go back to the initial question about the research engine, where we want to go, we want just as a group to continue working towards building a research engine that is designed to go the distance. Because there are so many things we still need to learn. We are at a very embryonic stage in neuroscience as such. I want to thank several people who have contributed and continue to contribute to this work, several of close collaborators, of course, the PhD students, those who have completed their work and they are ongoing, but also the more than 3,000 children who have participated in these studies and their families. Then for today's talks, related to the research on SLTs, this first lecture will be this one by Evgenia Kuki, from the single deficit hypothesis and comorbidity of learning dysfunctions to the RDoc framework, the new directions and challenges. Then Dr. Fela will touch on cognitive and linguistic processing in reading difficulties and provide evidence from studies using neurophysiological methods. And the SATE Lab and the dearest colleagues, Christos Metouris, Alex Geratsiotis, will speak about how we can treat reading difficulties. So, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the presentations.
present you our systematic review entitled From the Single Deficit Hypothesis and Comorbidity of Learning Dysfunctions to the RDoC Framework, New Directions and Challenges. So, well, neurodevelopmental disorders have a severe and diffuse impact not only on the individual as well as, but also to the community they exist in. So this is one of the main significance of exploring further these specific disorders. One of the earliest efforts into conceptualizing neurodevelopmental disorders was Pennington's single deficit model, which explored the etiological, neural, and cognitive underpinnings of the symptomatology of each specific neurodevelopmental disorder. It proposed that one specific dysfunctional component at each level of analysis could be the cause of the overt behavior we define as dysfunctional in its specific diagnostic category. However, it was frequently observed that symptoms existing in its disorder could also somehow be existing in the context of other disorders as well, in the context of other diagnoses. A phenomenon frequently commonly known as comorbidity. So to mend that, there were several hypotheses proposed that these specific predictors determining the emergence of each specific diagnosis could also be coexistent in the context of other diagnoses as well. So, okay, well, if you can see that these could be somehow differentiated across its hypotheses, these hypotheses had their limitations as well, because both the single deficit model as well as the comorbidity models failed to account for the possible differentiation among disorders on the etiological and cognitive level, but they also failed to account for the impact on clinical profiles over time. As a solution to these limitations, Pennington later proposed a multiple deficit model, which, as you can see here, allowed for exploring possible interactions either within each specific level of analysis, etiological, neural, cognitive, and behavioral, but also across the levels of analysis. And enriching that approach, the RDoC framework later was proposed. It proposes that each specific behavior can be examined across 7 units of analysis, spanning from genes to self-reports, and that each specific individual presenting dysfunctional behavior could be examined across 6 domains that are universally present in the general population. This specific framework is agnostic to categorical diagnosis, hence being more able to explore etiologically founded classification schemes. So in this review, we aimed to show that multiple neuroanatomical, physiological, and cognitive predictors can determine the manifestation of neurodevelopmental disorders, but also highlight that one theoretical challenge is determining how the RDoC framework could possibly be falsified, since the epigenetic nature of this framework could possibly account for most neurodevelopmental outcomes. Concerning our search strategy, we looked into databases of both published and unpublished research. We aimed to look for mainly primary research studies, but we also looked into reviews that could be incorporated in our theoretical background. The reviews span from the primary research studies, span from 2015 to 2022. And these are our inclusion criteria that were formulated based on the PICO framework. We looked into populations aged from 6 to 18 years old, and we also aimed for identifying studies that included individuals with either one of these specific terms related to neurodevelopmental disorders. And as I said before, we focused on both we focused on studies that applied the art framework. So we scanned all papers at an abstract level as well as at full text level. And one specific condition was that the application of the art framework should have been explicitly mentioned in the text in both the methods and the introduction section. We then conducted a snowball strategy that resulted at adding 7 more papers of primary research and reviews. These are our quality assessment scales. We applied each scale for each correspondent type of publication. And the papers that had a reporting percentage higher than 70% were included in the review. 2 independent reviewers were assessed each paper, so this is our interreliability index of 65%. So the accepted reviews were used in our introduction and discussion section, and then we extracted data from the primary research papers for both participant demographics and sample sizes, screening measures, and tasks assessed to measure its outcome. We then applied the qualitative meta-summary protocol in order to organize our data, and we calculated the manifest frequency effect sizes, which I will not show you for reasons of brevity. This is our Prisma flow. You can see that we ended up with 13 primary research papers, which is a small sample to be frank, but this also highlights the importance of looking into this subject further. These are our demographics. You can see that the ADHD participants were the most popular sample, and that male participants were much more frequent than female participants. And we also organized our findings in based on the 2-dimensional matrix of the RDoc. What you see here in the numbers is not the number of studies assessing each specific cell. It is mainly entries that show how many findings we had across all studies. For instance, if you see this number 8 over here, at the inhibition subconstruct, at the level of paradigms, it means that 8 paradigms were used across all studies to measure inhibition and suppression. And these are our forest plots. This one is for attention. It's supposed to be worse in NDDs, but you can see that there is a substantial amount of variance. Same in goal selection. These are inhibition deficits across NDDs. You can see here that the findings are a little more convergent. And here is working memory, a little more convergent as well. So studies also put an effort into identifying certain phenotypes across DSM-based diagnoses. One part of this specific effort concerned neuroanatomical substrates. It was found that decreased connectivity in the default mode and dorsal attention network were associated with attention deficits, and this pattern differentiated children with attention deficits from children with other NDDs. Also, attention deficits were related to neurophysiological changes, mainly the theta and beta band spectral power, which indicated that this specific population failed to rapidly identify target stimuli. Finally, the anterior hippocampal volume determined performance on tasks assessing both language and memory. Another part of this effort was based on identifying certain phenotypes based on cognitive characteristics. Self-reported cognitive control deficits were only partially explained by DSM-based diagnosis, which means that there were some overlaps between categorical diagnoses as far as the cognitive control deficits were concerned. Also, working memory profiles and general cognitive profiles showed some heterogeneity of diagnosis similar to the self-reported cognitive control deficit. And finally, children that had a higher severity of cognitive control and working memory deficits were also at risk for presenting some additional diagnoses in the next 2 years. This is a very interesting study showing that we can cluster either participants based on their performance, or we can cluster cognitive deficits based on how they might interact with each other. So in this study of Mareva and colleagues, it was found that pragmatic communication was distinct from structural language, and cool executive functions were distinct from hot executive functions. However, all these specific deficits, as you can see here in the graph, are interrelated. So, coming to conclusions, attention, cognitive control, and working memory deficits are frequently coexisting, and common etiologies might be at play here. And working memory deficits, since they tend to bridge neurodevelopmental disorders, can function as a transdiagnostic factor. From adding these points together, we can infer that deficits in multiple constructs are often interrelated, which could have been also the point of the three-axis brain, as Professor Papadopoulos said. One specific limitation to this study, as I showed you earlier in the RDoC matrix, is that the volume of research is not identical for constructs and units of analysis, which also highlights the point I made earlier, that there is an importance of studying this subject even further. This is what we propose for future studies. We propose that future studies should incorporate multiple units of analysis in order to understand the etiological underpinnings of working memory, but also entities in general. And future studies should also push research on neurodevelopmental disorders further towards the application of the RDoC framework. This should lead us to examining more systematically entities in a continuum. So, thank you all for your attention, but I should also thank all my supervisors for their guidance, and the postgraduate student of our lab, Andriani Tsagaraki, for being an excellent co-author. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm glad to be here. It feels like I'm at home. So to begin with, when a beginner reader in Greek is confronted with a previously unseen word, such as the word potami or river, he or she is faced with at least 5 interrelated tasks which must be undertaken to reliably recognize the word. First, all of the letters have to be recognized and differentiated from their visually confusing neighbors. Τοπού από το two. Second, the sounds of the letters must be retrieved and differentiated from their phonetically confusing neighbors. Vita, theta. Third, all phonemes must be stored in working memory in their exact order representation, pu, o, tu, a, etc. Fourth, the set of phonemes in working memory has to be blended together to form a phonological representation of the whole word. And finally, this phonological representation of the word has to be used to gain access to the lexicon. If the word is in the child's lexicon, spoken lexicon, he or she can move on to the next word. To accomplish these 5 tasks, a beginner reader in Greek follows more often the phonological route of the well-known dual route model. The development from novice to expert reading reflect the change from this early serial algorithmic processing of small units to rapid direct retrieval mechanism. Therefore, when skill readers see a word, they don't follow the 5 tasks mentioned above, but they access the word in their meta-lexicon and retrieve information about both its meaning and pronunciation. Therefore, to accomplish word recognition, readers, novice or expert, require to use both proximal and distal linguistic and cognitive skills respectively. The proximal linguistic skills, such as phonological awareness and RAN, are the mostly linguistic skills that are directly related to the 5 tasks mentioned above. The distal cognitive process, on the other, are more general and modality unspecific underlying cognitive processes. Information processing skills such as simultaneous and successive processing are included in this category. Here we present the role and relative contribution of proximal and distal and the linguistic and cognitive skills in word reading in our language, a language with consistent orthography, using findings from cognitive and neurophysiological measurements. The most frequently recognized proximal linguistic skill in word reading is phonological awareness. To date, phonological awareness broadly defines the ability to perceive and manipulate the sounds of spoken words, is a significant predictor of excellence in reading development, and at the same time, a reliable predictor of distinguishing poor from typically developing readers. The relevant findings derive from studies focusing primarily on behavioral measurements, emphasizing reaction time and accuracy. These measurements, however, provide information only for the output stage following the end of processing and tend to ignore the stage at which processing occurs. Recently, we investigated the differences between children with reading difficulties and their controls on phonological awareness tasks using event-related potentials. ERPs are electrical potential generated by the brain that are linked to specific internal or external events. 60 Greek-speaking Cypriot children with no documented sensory, intellectual, behavioral difficulties participated in our study. To select the children with reading difficulties, we first asked teachers to nominate children from their classroom who are experiencing reading difficulties. Next, nominated children were tested on reading fluency and cognitive ability measures to ensure that they met the criteria for reading difficulties. So 15 grade 3 and 15 grade 6 children who score at least 1 standard deviation below the age group mean on reading fluency task, and at the same time within the average range on both verbal and non-verbal tasks met the criteria and included in the RD groups. Next, 15 grade 3 and 15 grade 6 children were matched to the RD groups on chronological age. Participants' phonological skills at the phonemic sensitivity level were assessed with the phoneme elision task. Participant task was to decide if a specific word was produced by deleting the initial sound of the target word. EG data recording listed the N400 component. Manual analysis showed that the grade 3 RD group produced significantly longer N400 than their CA controls in the phoneme elision task, showing that children with reading difficulties require more time to process the phonological information than their peers. No differences were observed in the N400 component between the grade 6 RD and control groups, showing that the RD children outgrow difficulties in the phonological awareness task due to the consistency of the Greek writing system. Overall, the findings from ERP confirm the evidence from the behavioral studies on the critical role of phonological awareness in reading inconsistent orthographies, especially in the first grades of school. The second proximal linguistic skill in word recognition is rapid automatized naming, RAN. RAN is defined as the ability to name as fast as possible visually presented, highly familiar symbols such as digits, letters, colors, etc. Several studies have shown that RAN is a powerful concurrent and longitudinal predictor of learning to read across different orthographies such as English, Greek, Finnish, etc. Furthermore, RAN is a second code deficit in reading and disabilities. Poor readers are consistently slower on RAN tasks than their peers. Recently, we investigated the differences in eye movements between Greek-speaking children with reading difficulties and controls, examining their performance on RAN tasks. Using the same sample of participants, we developed a computerized version of a rapid naming task. Participants' task was to name as quickly as possible the names of 5 letters which were either phonologically difficult, vita theta, or visually difficult, zeta xi, difficult to process. 3 types of eye movements were recorded: fixations, saccades, and regressions. And our results reveal that children with reading difficulties made more and longer fixations, more saccades, and more and longer regression movements than their CA controls. The presented spatial overlay view belongs to a grade 3 student included in the CA group. Fixations are represented as a halo circle, and saccades and regressions are represented as an arrow, of course in a different direction. And here is the spatial overlay view of a student with reading disabilities. The student tends to make more and longer fixations, more saccades, and more and longer regression movements compared to his or her typically developing counterparts. Our findings contribute to the relevant literature in 3 important ways. First, given that fixations reflect online cognitive processing, our findings suggest that children with reading difficulties require more time than their typically achieving peers to acquire the same amount of phonological and visual information. Second, children with reading difficulties tend to scan the naming task through many and long fixations, passing almost every letter of the naming task, leading to an increased number of saccades. In contrast, skilled readers in the control groups quickly name an array of letters, picking up information about letter names with brief fixations and often by processing more than one symbol at a time. And finally, children with reading difficulties tend to return to a preceding letter to reread information they miss or falsely decoded, leading to an increased number of regressions. However, phonological awareness and RAN do not tell the complete story of learning to read, and certainly not of reading problems. There is also evidence that distal cognitive processes, such as information processing skills, predict reading development. In the context of this presentation, we examine the role of 2 distal cognitive processes, specifically the role of simultaneous and successive processing. Successive processing involves the arrangement, the integration of stimuli into a discrete serial order where each component is related to the next. It is used in skills such as word decoding and spelling, where maintaining the exact sequence of letters is crucial for completion. Simultaneous processing, on the other, involves the arrangement of incoming information into a holistic pattern. For example, recognize orders by sight involves this kind of processing, as does comprehension of the meaning of a sentence or a paragraph. Several studies in children with reading difficulties have shown that they experience a deficit in successive and simultaneous processing. Papadopoulos and his colleagues in a longitudinal study examine the unique and joint contribution of both distal and proximal cognitive skills to fluency skills in Greek in a group of children following from grade 1 to grade 2. The results of structural equation modeling showed that the literacy skills were predicted by both distal and proximal cognitive skills regardless of age. Specifically, in grade 1, distal cognitive processes predict the literacy skills through run and phonological awareness. In grade 2, only successive processing predicted literacy skills through run and phonological awareness. Simultaneous processing, on the other, predicted literacy skills directly, suggesting that words in grade 2 were recognized through direct visual access. To sum up, findings from cognitive and neurophysiological measurements suggest that the strongest and most consistent proximal predictors of reading are phonological awareness and run. For this reason, this set of skills should consist of the primary focus of reading remediation programs aiming to enhance reading skills. Nevertheless, being able to manipulate the sounds of spoken words and rapidly name a sequence of letters requires a set of distal processes that may be more general and modality unspecific. When formal instruction begins, when formal literacy begins, effective successive and simultaneous processing supports the deployment of phonological awareness and run and thus reading. Therefore, there is a high demand for distal cognitive processes in the early phases of literacy development that allows the deployment of proximal processes and reading. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for the invitation.
Hello, my side. My name is Christos.
Hello, my name is Christos Matoulis. I'm a researcher at the Software Engineering and Technologies Lab of the Department of Computer Science of the University of Cyprus. And I'm here to, thank you for the invitation, Professor Papadopoulos. We're here to present the ePrep platform, which is part of the distance project. Which is a joint collaboration between our laboratory, the computer science background and CAN of Professor Papadopoulos. So in this presentation, I'm going to present to you the ePrep platform, very shortly discuss about the design, the development and initial results. The ePrep was initially a paper-based version games. As part of the Resistance project, our goal was to render the games from paper-based to web-based to increase the accessibility of the games. In terms of the design of ePrep, the project involved a web version of ePrep, but also a microgenetic data analytics module, which we will discuss more in the following presentation, and also the ePrep management platform that manages and makes available the ePrep games and also the integration of all the above modules into one unified platform. So here you can see some screenshots of the games. We had basically 8 games, 2 versions of each game, which were different, each version was different. So in total we had 16 games. As you can see, there are different types of games, each one assisting children in a different way in terms of reading difficulties. In terms of the microgenetic data analytics module, here the aim was to record any data produced by the children while they were interacting with the platform and playing the game, basically. So the types of data we were storing, of course, these were depending also on the type of game, but we were storing, recording mouse clicks, total playing game, number of drags for games that required dragging objects across the